Gotta save all the good questions for Shir. All right, good morning. Today's daf is Hey Gimel. Hey Gimel. So we got to the top now. So we had a discussion yesterday. So we say that you go ahead, you have a contract to buy 3 trees. You know what comes along with 3 trees? It's like a small orchard. So you get the land in between.
Pay Gimel with Aleph.
Pay Gimel with Aleph, yes, in the top there. So you get the land in between. But however, if the trees are too far from one another, so then you're not really buying an orchard, then you're buying 3 separate trees, right? If the trees are too close together, then they won't be able to grow properly and will have to be cut down early. So you're not buying an orchard. So we were giving a range. So we had 2 opinions. We had one opinion that the trees have to range in distance from 4 to 8 amos, and the other one says 8 to 16 amos. So now we are around, 8 lines from the top or so. Rav Yosef, Rav Yosef, right? No, one last time. Right. Right. Now, so we had Rav Yosef. He was asked the kasha. We had the case of every other row. We had it was the 16, so that was a group for 16. So it says, I don't know what you're talking about. Mishnah, all there. All I know, there was a Maisa in this place of the shepherds of the Yusa, please, right? And over there, they ruled it had to be 4, right? In case of the trees, they had to be as long as you can fit an ox there to go through to plow. You have 4 is fine. So they brought a proof from Rav Yosef who said 4 to 8 from a Maisa. So the Gemara asked now, Rav Yosef, Milot Tanan, why don't you bring a Mishnah? Rav Shimon Aimrim, Hanaites Karmo Shmona Amais Al Shmoina Mutter Lohavi Zer L'Sham. You go ahead and you have something, you plant something, which is 8 amos. I know 8 amos. It's mutter to bring to plant seed there. Why is it mutter to plant seed there? Oh, why? Because 8. It's already 8. And the range before I wasn't exact when I said 4 to 8. It was 4 to 7.99. Right. So over there, as long as it's that, then it's considered to be you get the land in between. Once it's 8. It's not considered to be its own orchard. So over here, this Mishnah says if you have vines that are more than 7.99, i.e., in other words, they're 8, at least 8, you're allowed to go ahead and plant in between them because it's not a vineyard. So he says over there, right? So you see, 8 is already the max and not 16. So why did you bring a Maisa, right? A 4 for 8. So So it says, no, to bring a Maisa, a proof, and it was ruled by the Chachamim, is even a better proof than just a Mishnah with a Tana stays in. Now, remember, we said it was a range. So we just brought a case that the max was 8. So Shlomo Rav Yosef, so I understand, according to Rav Yosef, he has proof that he goes like Rabbi Shimon. So he has that there was soon see that the maximum space between trees is 8, or slightly less than 8, 7.99. And the minimum, we also know the minimum, which is, he says, is 4. So what was the case? With Mazarin, the maximum is 8, right? In other words, like the case we just brought, right? That if it was 8 or minimum, if it was already 8, then you're allowed to go ahead and plant in between because there's not considered to be one vineyard. It's like separate vines. And Ritzufin, what about too close? If it's too close, not considered to be vineyard because they're going to be uprooted. Tonight we're going to Mishnah. If you have a vineyard and vines that were planted less than Dalad Amos, Eino Kerem, Rabbi Shimon says Rabbi Shimon, it's not a Kerem. It doesn't qualify as a vineyard because it's too close together. They're not going to grow properly, and it's not a vineyard. So you see, 4. Yeah, but they're going to be uprooted. So technically, the ground is not going. We're not calling it a vineyard enough to create prohibitions to planting seeds there. No, it is considered a keren, but right now, right? A little bit more like Alan is saying. He says, it's a bad farmer, and therefore, if he does one row too close, it's like that row isn't there, but the other rows are can still there. So that's coming. But nevertheless, we see the minimum is 4. So we see 4 to 8 like Rabbi Shimon. So El Rav Nachman, according to Rav Nachman, it said the shiurim to be for the trees were 8 to 16. So I'll leave it to Rabbanan. The most distance we saw is 16. That was the case we brought yesterday. But how do we know that the minimum is 8? So Gemara says, Svaru, it's a logical argument. Why? Rabbi Shimon Palga, right? By the fact that Rabbi Shimon his maximum basically was double the minimum, or the minimum was half of what the maximum was, i.e. it was 4 and 8. So too, we'll say it's the same ratio when it comes to Rabbanan. Rabbanan Nami Palga, Rabbanan will also say it's half. So if the maximum was 16, it must be that their minimum was 8. And Amar Rava, and Rava says, Hilchos Adalach is, what is the distance between the trees where you get the land in between? Me arba amos for 4 amos va'ad sheish esrei. Right? So we took the minimum of 1 and the maximum of other, 4 amos till 16 amos, so you get all the land in between. And tiny closely the Rava, we have a price in support of Rava. Sakamiya mekurvan. How close could they be for it to still be considered to be microphone, right? How close is it? Does it still, in order for it to be an orchard and not just independent trees that you would have to uproot? So it's arba amos, it has a minimum of 4 amos. The kamiyah meruchakim, what's the maximum? Sheish is right up until 16 amos. Harei zekana, and in such a case, he has acquired karka, and also any sort of shrubs or small trees that have grown in between this area. Therefore, if one of the trees dries out, then he can go, he has the land, he can go ahead and replant. However, pachas mikan, but let's say it was less than 4, or yasser akan, or is more than 16. Oh, shalachim b'zach. Or let's say he doesn't buy at the same time, right? He buys one now, and then next year he comes back and he buys another one, and then the third year another one. Over there, he has not acquired lois akarka, not the ground, lois ilana, shabreo, not the small trees that have grown between them. Therefore, yavesh ilon and nixas. Therefore, if it dries up the tree, or if it gets cut down, a low karka, then he does not get karka.
Smoking.
We're on fire today. All right, now let's get technical. Have we not been technical enough? Let's get even more. Is it mimakam katzar humaydet or mimakam rachav humaydet? Right, they're very exact. Now, the way a tree grows, right? It's the thickest at the bottom, right? So, and then it's more narrow on top, right? So, do you measure from the bottom, right, which is like the widest, or do you measure from the top, right, which would be, in other words, it would be, furthest away, which would be, the skinniest there, and therefore, have, I guess, less space available to the next tree, or more space.
Trunk.
I'm sorry?
So if you're measuring from your trunk.
Right. So assuming you're measuring from the trunk, not the branches, right? So the question is, right, as we'll soon see this case of grafting and stuff, which we're going to learn from, they actually measured, from branches to see how close it is to the other stuff. But anyway, when it comes to, we are measuring from the trunk, as Mark points out. He answered Rav Ashi. So Toshma, come listen. The Tanah we learned in the Mishnah, Harakuva Shebegefen. So if you have a grafting like a vine that's in a vine, right? Basically from the middle, right? You graft it at one end and it gets, more narrow. So you don't, which end, you don't do it from the most narrow end. You don't measure from, the thickest end by the tree. Rather, in the middle is where you measure its distance, let's say, to another grafted area. So therefore, just like over there, you measure from halfway. That's what it says over there. So therefore, in this case, you should go ahead and measure, not if the tree is 12 feet tall. So let's go ahead and measure, what from the width at the 6 foot point. So let's say you bought 3 trees. All right, but let's say it's one tree, right? But it's like a cluster of trees, certain trees. And I remember I was just talking to somebody. There's a big tree in Rogers Park. Right, there used to be 6 right behind the tennis courts, right? 6 huge trunks, coming out from over there, and you can actually stand in the middle, right? So let's just say the dirt and the soil, right, got higher up, right? So it looked like 6 independent trees, but they actually came from the same rooting system. So such a case. So let's say someone goes ahead and he has one long vine, right? But then he sort of grass into the ground. So it's sort of like it goes up and then it comes down into the ground, right? Then it goes further along and then it comes back up, and it's all separated. It's far apart from each other. So it actually looks like three different ones. Okay, it actually looks like three different vines growing, right? Versus one long attached piece. So do we say in that case? So and then you have two right next to each other, like two rows next to each other. So do we say it's like a 3 by 2, right? Or 2 rows of 3? And so Rabbi Yezer, if it's between this measurement of 4 to 8, then then it is mitzaref to become a kerem, a vineyard. So you see, even though they're connected below ground, if they're not connected above ground, they're to be separated. If not, they're not mitzaref. And boyra papa machaloi shnayim sadehu. So let's say a guy sells him 2 trees and one is on the boundaries, right? We've seen earlier the boundaries used to be a little bit elevated, wasn't part of the field. So let's say the third tree was like on the boundary next to the guy's field. So did he intend on selling him the land, or because he didn't sell him from 3 from his own land, he's not including land in the sale? So what is the law in such a case? Or I sell you 2 trees in my yard, and I actually own a tree in Eddie's yard, and I'm selling you my 2 trees and Eddie's tree. So is it the land in between or not? Take you. The Gemara does not give a teretz. Turn the page. So by Rav Ashi has a question. Bor, what about you got 2 trees there, but there's a pit in between Mahu Shatafsik, right? Does that go ahead and separate and say, hey, I didn't sell you the land in the middle because there's like a pit in between, or Amasamayim, or a creek running through it? Mahu Shatafsik, does that stop it or not? Or what about Shusarabim? What about Shusarabim in between, right? In between the trees, right? And both sides are my land. Mahu, or Richa the Dikla, or let's say like a wall of palm trees, which is just it's a barrier, just like the Shusarabim. Mahu. So once again, take it. So boy minei Hillel Rebbe Allah Erez Benehem. Let's say a cedar grows in between the 3 trees. Mahu. So Mara says, Allah, understand, if he bought 3 trees, he owns the land in between. So Bashus and Didei nothing. What do you mean? He owns the land and they grew afterwards, so it's his. Rather, there was a cedar there before. Now, cedar's a chashuv thing. So if I'm buying 3 trees and in the area in between there's a cedar, maybe the cedar is so chashuv and it's not included in the sale. But wait, if the cedar is not included, perhaps not only that, perhaps might even be a barrier. So Ma'u Samarle, Kana v'Kana. He acquires both the Erez, right, the cedar, and he also acquires the land in between. Both of them would be, acquired by the thing. The cedar is not considered to be something separate; it's part of the land, and therefore that would be included in sale, and is not considered afsaka between the trees. So he said, how do they stand? So before we had a picture yesterday of the fidget spinner, right? Of the 3. Yeah, you turn back yesterday, Mayor, a couple pages, you'll see the fidget spinner. Anyway, so
I remember that tomorrow.
Anyway, so in this case,
It's not that.
Last time.
So anyway, so so there was a picture of basically a triangle, right? So now the question is case. So Rab Omar Kashua, how are the 3 trees in a row? Right. 1, 2, 3, and that's basically just the space. Like the land goes in a line, right? Not like the picture we had. Shmuel Omar Kichatsuba, right? Like more like a triangle, like the picture we saw earlier. So Man Omar Kashua, the one who says you buy 3 trees in a row, Kol Shekain Kichatsuba. Certainly, you get the land in between a triangle. Man Omar Kichatsuba, we had no in a triangle. Then Avakashura, but if it's in a row, then low. Then you do not acquire that land. Why is that? My time, Mashub, the Mizdara Ben. Because basically, once there's a triangle, and now it's not easy to maneuver to go ahead and plow that area if I was a seller and retain that land. So since that land is going to be difficult for me to maintain, I'll say, you know what? I'm going to throw the land in with the trees. But if the space, the land, and the trees are easy for me to go ahead and landscape or plow or do whatever, then I'm going to keep it. So in a case of a row, it's very easy. You just have something blocking, and you're able to to move around it. I guess the triangle is more difficult to maneuver. Avakashura, low. But what do you say? But in case of no, it will be said because I said maskifla Rav Hamnuna. So Rav Hamnuna Sakasha Ayulaman Diyamar Kichatsuba, the one who says there's a triangle. My time of delay. What are you going to say? In a case of it's a triangle, what's the reason why the guy doesn't acquire the land in the middle? Why? Because it's difficult to go ahead and maintain, and therefore he sells it to the guy. So Alamiata Zavin Tlas Higi Urmaisa. The guy sells in small bushes, which do not include land. But now it's difficult to go ahead and plow between those bushes. So what are you going to tell me now? Since it's difficult, the seller's just going to go ahead and throw it in, right? You buy not only it's not trees that acquire land, but even little bushes. So I'm like, no, no, if there's bushes, if there's just bushes, that even if it's hard to cultivate in between, right? We say the land is not included because the bushes are not chashuv. However, you're selling trees, that's chashuv, and if the land in between there is difficult to plow, then the land is also thrown in with the chashuv purchase. Fine. Mishnah Pegel Beis. Mishnah says, "Hamayker roish behema gasa." One who goes ahead and sells the head of a large animal.
Living or dead?
I assume dead. I assume dead. I assume good question, but I assume dead. Yeah, let's say dead. Yeah, I mean I was assumption the whole time. So because Rosh Behema Gasa Loimacher Saraglaim, he has not sold. I mean, as opposed to like the rights of that. So Loimacher Saraglaim, he has not included the legs. Each one is chashav on its own, and therefore, if I'm buying that, like we said, certain things you buy, something else is included. You buy, I bought the head. The head comes with the feet. What do you mean? Says the Rosh Behema Gasa Loimacher Saraglaim. He has not going and sold the legs. If I sell someone the legs, he has not sold the expensive independent head. He goes ahead and he sells the lungs of the animal to somebody. The liver is not thrown in. If he sells him the liver, he has not sold him the lungs. That is because that was a behema gasa. Aval bedaka, but a smaller animal with a nice big head and small legs. Makar Sarosh, if he sells the head, Makar Sarosh, he's including the legs. The legs are small, the head is big. Makar Sarosh, he sells the legs. Low Makar Sarosh, because since it's small legs and the head is kosher, the head's not included. Now the same thing over here. Makar Sakana, the lungs, which are big, if he sells the lungs, Makar Sakabi, it includes the liver. And Makar Sakabi, but if he sells them, I'm going to tell you this liver, this small non-chashuv liver, like Makar Sakana, it has not included the lungs. Fine. Now, Arba Midas B'Maikrin. There's basically 4 rules, which are all logical rules, which make sense when it comes to sale of things. Basically, who can go ahead and go back. So, Machar Loichitin Yafos, if I go ahead and Meir owns a store and Meir sells candy, and I go to Meir and I say, give me the good candy, and I've been eating so rice, and turns out he sold me the bad candy. Halokaf Yafo, Laksabo. I can go come back to the next day and say, Meir, you sold me the bad stuff, not the good stuff. Rose, right? Vanimsa Yafos. Let's say the opposite. Let's say I was supposed to buy bad, right? And he gave me the good stuff. He meant to sell me, give me the cheap stuff, and he also has the good stuff. So then the mayor can call me up and say, "Oh, I gave you the wrong stuff. I was supposed to give you the bad stuff. I gave you the expensive stuff."
Reverse it.
Now, if it was a case of Rose Vanimsa Rose, I'm selling a bad stuff, and he sold me bad stuff, or Yafos Vanimsa Yafos, or good stuff. He sold me good stuff. Now the other one can't go ahead and come back 2 hours later and say, "Hey, give my money back. You take your item back." It was sold. It was a fair trade. We had a deal. There was a kinyan. The sale is over. You can't demand a refund, right? But let's say case Shamachlis Vaninsis Levana or Levana Shnisis Lamachlis. So let's say he's buying a certain style, a red, let's say the red wheat, and it turns out it's white wheat, or white wheat, and it turns out it's red. In other words, both of them have their positives and both have their negatives. It's just a different kind, right? It's like I'll buy a white one versus a black one, or a white Tesla and a black Tesla. Is different. So some people might prefer one or the other. Or Eitzin Shazai, when it's social Sigma. Let's say it was wood. I went ahead and I bought from you. The sale was I'm going to buy a pound of olive wood, and it turns out you gave me sycamore or shel sigma, but so shozai. Since each one of them have their positives and benefits. Or yain needs a chaymetz, or let's say wine. It turns out it was vinegar, or I needed vinegar. Chaymetz v'nitza yain sold me wine. Both of them can go ahead and retract. In other words, the guy who wanted to buy something, he got the wrong thing. He never wanted that. And the other guy, the guy who intended to, depart with something, and turns out he departed with something else, he can also be chayzer. We'll stop here at the Gemara. Everyone have a wonderful day, and Mr. Hashem, pick up from here tomorrow.